Hello, good people, and welcome to the To Be Encouraged podcast with Bishop Julius C. Trimble. I am your co host, Reverend Dr. Brad Miller. Always a joy and a pleasure to be with Bishop Trimble as he comments that are things that are happening on the world and offers an encouraging word to an often discouraged world. And Bishop Trimble, part of what we want to talk about today is a little bit of the discouragement that's happening in the world in regards to political situations, in regards to situations regarding jobs and the economy and the environment, and some current realities that are a little bit tough to take. And you have had some encounters with people. You live part of the time in Washington, D.C. area, so you've had some encounters with people who are having a tough way to go. First of all, welcome to your podcast. And then I want you to share a little bit what you've been experiencing recently where some people are discouraged a little bit.
Thank you, Brad. It's we're living in some challenging times, and I know often people say every time period in history has been challenging, but I think in particular we 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 can't ignore the fact that with the change of administration in Washington D.C., a new president, President Trump, for the second time in the White House, immediately he came in with the intention to cut the federal budget and cut the federal workforce, and immediately write executive orders, both attacking diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, as well as the workforce. And I know people are angry. I've met some people who are angry. I lived part of the time in Washington D.C. And of course, if you all of a sudden get a notice that you're going to no longer be employed, or you're being furloughed or suspended until further notice, it has a ripple effect on families, and it's had a ripple effect on nonprofit organizations as well that have received federal dollars. So we're living in some challenging times.
Well, I want you, if you don't mind, go a little bit further about some of the people you may have encountered. How has this impacted them personally? If you get, and some of these is understanding some of these really cryptic, kind of weird emails that federal employees are getting is not helping because they are just adding to the anxiety. And tell me about some personal encounters you may have had with people who are just, kind of rocked back on their heels by what's happened. Can you share any personal encounters you may have had?
Yeah, this past week, past with last week in February, if you will, federal employees were being let go with very little notice, 15 minutes to clear out their offices, and many of these persons, for example, who are employees at the United States Aid Agency, the Agency for International Development, and so faith leaders as well as other coworkers, federal coworkers, stood outside and provided hugs, and bottles of water and flowers were being given to those who were leaving their jobs. Tears were being shed. I wasn't able to make either one of those events. Others, I do know others who were there and talked with them, and some of it was on the news, but it was just kind of heart wrenching. Uh, I was reflecting, Brad, on the scriptures of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians, the fourth chapter. Sometimes I like to look at Eugene Peterson's Message Bible because it
Yes,
kind of has a contemporary ring to it.
right.
Ephesians 4. Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge. And don't stay angry. Don't give the devil that king of that kind of foothold in your life. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life. Injustice should make Christ followers bristle, yet get motivated to action. So I like the way Peterson says, go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry. Give space to be angry, just like
Well,
we
for
give
goodness
space
sake,
to,
that's
yeah,
natural. My goodness, what
yeah,
is happening?
yeah.
People are shocking because of out of no fault of their own, they are being
Mm.
hammered in a very just brutal, cruel way. So, what do you think are some appropriate ways that people can express anger and yet not be vindictive, as is kind of the model we've been taught by our current president, to be vindictive?
Well, I think one of the way people can express anger is to make noise, not to be quiet about
Yeah.
the anger. Write letters, letters to the editor, write letters to our elected officials, or whether or not you're in a blue state or a red state, or whether or not you're represented by a Republican or Democrat. Say, talk about the real life impact these things have immediately. If you had a 6 months notice that you're going to lose your job, that might be one thing, but to find out that you're going to lose employment and you have a mortgage payment to pay in 2 weeks, then that's pretty. It
Yeah.
has a pretty chilling effect, and it has a chilling effect because people aren't certain what's going to happen next. For
Right. Right.
example, for example, Brad, the suspension on United States foreign aid has just been horrific. We provide over $60 billion, even apart from the money that's given to United States Agency for International Development. Just $60 billion in international support for humanitarian needs. And so all of a sudden, with the change of administration, never before in our history, whether we've gone from a Democrat to a Republican or a Republican to Democrat, have we had this kind of radical suspension of support for those who are the most vulnerable across the globe. And I think not only are people who are being affected immediate directly should be angry, but I think Christians should be angry at this
Yeah.
point. And so part of encouraging people is to pour courage, Brad, into people to say, okay, injustice should make Christ followers bristle, but not just bristle, but also get motivated to act.
Yeah, because what we're talking about here has very little to do with the gospel message of compassion and encouragement and care for the needy. You care for the poor and needy. It is just brutal activities which are hurting the most marginalized and vulnerable people, and hurting a lot of a lot of people, whether they are poor folks in overseas or other situations like it, hurting a lot of people. So there's a lot of anger, a lot of mistrust, a lot of angst. We live in angsty times, I heard some commentators say. And so, indeed, that is the case. And so, Bishop, I just think we need now more than ever. We actually, it's been said, you and I have talked many times about how there's a lot of loneliness and a lot of things, a lot of desperation in the world. Now we not
Hmm.
only have loneliness and desperation, we have people who have been hurt. I mean, hurt
Mm.
bad. And so they are, kind of bleeding all over the place, metaphorically, and so what do we do as Christian folk, as men and women of faith, as church folk, as people to help maybe stop the bleeding a little bit and get some encouraging words, something positive going? What are some things that we might be able to do? And I know you've been digging into scriptures and some other things along that line. What do we do when we have such a time of angst and pain?
I think we have to remember that we're saved by grace, but our grace is not just for us to have personal salvation, but to really be what I call a community benefit of compassion. We have to be committed, Brad, to making sure that compassion is not just a one-off thing for individuals, but we ought to have compassion for communities, compassion for countries that are not our own, compassion for people that may disagree with us, and also be compassion for the most marginalized amongst our community. The Ephesians, the second chapter, says, "You are saved by God's grace because of your faith. The salvation is God's gift. It's not something you possess. It's not something you did that you can be proud of. Instead, listen to this: we are God's accomplishment, created in Christ Jesus to do good things."
Hmm.
God planned for these good things to be that the way that we live our lives. We
Yeah.
have been created to do good, especially for those who are the least and the most vulnerable amongst us. 90% of the United States Agency for International Development contracts have been suspended. So that literally means that
Amazing. Shocking.
millions
Absolutely
of
shocking.
people millions of people across the globe, Brad, are impacted by that. Now, this is from the Time magazine and AP
And we're talking about life,
Associated
and we
Press.
are literally talking about life and death issues here. This isn't some
Mm.
metaphorical or some
Oh,
academic study. People's lives are on the line here.
let me give you just a couple of examples. Health clinics in Haiti, where there's no real functional government, but we've still continue to have health clinics provided by, supported by faith communities, nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations. They've been shut down in terms of what they can do. These are places where pregnant mothers in Haiti go to give birth. So
Yes,
this is their only access to maternal health care. Now that's been suspended. Action
gone.
Against Hunger, an organization that works in Congo, where United Methodists are very prevalent. Action Against Hunger, where literally hundreds of thousands of people get, uh, where malnutrition is a real issue, get food that's been suspended. In Ethiopia, 5,000 workers forced to stop working. These are indigenous people in Ethiopia, Ethiopians, who work with people who have HIV or who have malaria. And can you be in South Sudan, the International Rescue Committee, or in Bangladesh, where 600,000 people who get maternal health care from money that's been supported by the USA aid are no longer getting that funding, that flow of funding coming through. What this literally means, Brad, is that more people will die, more children will go hungry,
Well, hey,
and this is not a movie. It's a nightmare.
and in all those situations, what I just think a lot of people, uh, Mr. Triple, don't get is how if people are hungry and desperate, that is going to lead overseas and in our country to disruption politically, violence, other things can emerge out of that. When people get hungry, and or people seeing their babies dying, they get
They get
desperate
desperate.
and they act in ways that are going to be uh, just a colossal mess out there.
Mm.
And you just described what's happening overseas. Of course, we got several things happening in our own country with federal, not only federal workers, but aid cuts all over the place. And of course, people in marginalized communities are taking the brunt of that. And I just got to ask you, Bishop, what do you think men and women of faith are thinking about this right now? And is this many men and women of faith, voted for Trump, thinking that this was somehow a part of their an act of a Christian faith of some sort? And yet here we are. I think a lot of people who made that vote are saying what's going on here, but I don't know. You unpack that for me a little bit. I don't want to relitigate the election too much, but it just bugs me to think that so many people said they're people of faith, and these things that are so diametrically opposed to the gospel are happening. So unpack that for me a little bit. Do you feel the same way, or do you have help me understand what your understanding of this is?
I think we have been sold a bill of goods that somehow what lies that have been dressed up to be portrayed as truth are offered to us on the menu of life,
Hmm.
when in fact we know that it's just not really right. It's not really true. Sure enough, no one's against us having, for example, uh, uh, borders. A country has a right to have borders.
Yes.
No one is against cutting government waste. If that was on the ballot, if they said, would I like government to cut waste? I probably would vote yes. But when it's translated into, maybe it's not really about cutting government waste, but removing civil service workers, removing people who are nonpartisan, and just to create a bunch of open jobs that then have to be filled by people who have political favor. That just seems contrary to anything that's compassion. And plus, we realize that the world depends upon the United States, the wealthiest country in the world. Uh, as the Bible says, to those that much has been given, much is required. uh, it's been part of our pride, if you will, as a country, to always be compassionate beyond our own borders. So whether that's through support through the United Nations, hunger ministries, or climate change goals, or if that's been direct aid to non-governmental organizations that are serving some of the poorest countries in the world. Um, so I would say to those who are listening, we should remember what does the gospel say in Matthew 25 when Jesus talks about the judgment of the nations. I mean, we should not just read that once. We should probably go back over and over
Mm,
again. That when Jesus comes, or when judgment comes, all the nations will be gathered in front of him. He will put the sheep on his right, but on the goats will be put on his left. They will say to those on the right, "Come, you who receive good things from my Father, inherit the kingdom that was prepared for you. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothes to wear. I was sick and you took me care of me." This means whether it's FEMA, the
mm,
Federal Emergency that acts in within the United States, or
right.
whether it's U.S. aid or United Nations or the World Health Organization, we still should do that. Then they said, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and give you clothes to wear? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" Then he will reply to them, "I assure you that when we have done it for one of the least of these, you have done it for me. I
Well,
was hungry and you didn't give me food. I was thirsty and you didn't give me water. You cut my job when I was paying my mortgage payment.
right.
And you claimed that I was doing nothing that had great value for the
Yeah.
country." Did you know, Brad, that 30% of federal workers are veterans?
I
So here
didn't.
we are cutting.
Yeah.
We say we're in favor of supporting our veterans that have served, and yet we're cutting those folks. We're
Yeah.
cutting VA benefits and those who work in VA
Well, you you
that
know
are
you
so.
you've talked there about kind of the nations being judged, and so or it's what who's on the right and who's on the left. And I think it's pretty evident that at this point, the government of the United States, the Trump administration, has made decisions which are just absolutely antithetical to what you described there. Therefore, that means something else has to happen, and hopefully, systematically, there'll be some things that need to happen governmentally and elections and that kind of thing. But in the meantime, what do men and women of faith need to be doing, to kind of fill the gap? Because I think that's what's going to happen in one form or another. Faith organizations, other social service agencies, some and other are going to have to do the best they can to step up to be to fill those needs, both domestically and internationally. What do you think? You have any thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll give you one example. I have a close relationship with the United Methodist work in Africa at Africa University,
Yes.
and they've been impacted because they do at Africa University do research around malaria and tuberculosis and sustainable farming. And in comparison to some of these other countries, they don't get that much money, but USAID dollars have assisted in the work that's happening there, and that's been suspended. So I would say, we have to figure out a way, those of us who support institutions or have relationships outside of the United States and right in our communities where people are losing jobs. So
Yeah.
I think the faith community really has to step up and say, how can we come alongside those persons who have been most directly affected by some of these decisions? That includes the revocation of diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility
Right.
uh, programs. One of the orders that came out was about suspending workers who are on probation, and many of the persons who are what they call Schedule A workers, Brad, are people who have disabilities.
Hmm.
So
Oh.
we're letting people go who were able to get jobs, good jobs with the federal government, who had sometimes psychological or physical disabilities or traumatic injuries or PTSD. People were able to work, be gainfully employed with dignity, and provide needed services and sometimes quite specific services, who are employees, but may have been employed for less than 200 days.
Right.
So all of a sudden, these folks have become very vulnerable. Many of them have already been let go. So I say all that to say, friends, let us not grow weary in doing good.
Yes.
As Galatians says, let us not grow weary in doing good. But we ought to be angry and give ourselves space to be, and not only be angry, but walk alongside, Brad, those persons who are angry. And I say, take your anger and turn it into action.
Yeah.
Take your anger
Well,
and turn it into
there's
action.
no doubt you've set the stage for us. We have an absolute assault against dignity and humanity, and therefore,
And
if men
democracy.
and democracy, oh my goodness, and if we are men and women, if we are Americans and believe in democracy, that's one thing. But if we're men and women in faith and we do believe in humanity and decency, and giving people dignity, then we are going to be involved and engaged. We cannot sit back and just let this happen to us. We have to step up and get involved. So I know you've got some thoughts on that, but I would just like for you to just kind of couch it in this as we bring our conversation around to this. What we always say, give me an example of things that, we've talked about some kind of disturbing things here today. What are some things that we need to be encouraged by? And maybe some examples that you've seen that are encouraging.
I've been encouraged by those people who are willing to come together across denominational lines, and political lines, and to organize. We believe that we can't just pray our way to a better world. We have to pray, but we also have to organize, and then realize who are who are the people we can work with in our communities that have a similar concern. We're also angry and don't want to just be angry. We don't want to just sit in our anger
Right.
and make that then becomes bitterness.
Yeah.
But how do we take that and say, wait a minute, we believe we serve a God who wants us to do, as Ephesians says, we've been created to do good works.
Yes.
So we need. Well, I've been encouraged by. I've met. There are a lot of young people, a lot younger than you and I, Brett, who are
Yeah.
just extremely talented, and particularly in social media, and are able to communicate on multiple platforms to let people know, that you can get along, you can get with several other people, whether it's around immigration, whether it's around transgender rights, whether it's around federal employees having due process. Uh, we need to confront our elected officials. We need to support our judiciary system, where people can still make claims, because I think I'm concerned about the attacks on the judiciary system, and
Yeah.
it's as though we only have, as all of a sudden now we only supposed to have one branch of government,
Oh my
which is
goodness.
the
Yeah.
executive branch.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged because there are people I've met people. I don't want to put other people on Front Street, but I've met people the last couple of weeks that I had not known.
Yeah.
Catholics, Protestants, persons who we might be considered just secular but committed to the nonprofit work. And
Right.
I think that that's where we will be able to sin. And also the ability to actually do three things. One, we should reach out with respect to our elected officials, expect a response, and if they refuse to give us response, we should ask for resignation. Those are 3 hours. 3 hours. We should reach out with respect, expect the response, uh, and if we can't, if they we don't even get the decency and to get a response from people we are paying for with our tax dollars, then we should ask for resignations.
Well, I
And
think
I
those.
believe that, yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry. Those just sound like great marching orders. In
yeah.
effect, we need. We got to call out the injustice. Let justice roll down like waters, and we got to
Mm.
call it out, and then we got to organize, as you say, and to get engaged, and then partner with those like-minded people to get involved. And just like what you said, the 3 R's to reach out, expect a response, and ask for resignations, and get involved and engaged, and understand that we're not without resources here, right? We do have people, we do have agency in order to do things. And it's
Mm.
time, and I'm hearing a call to action from you, my friend, and I appreciate it. So, any final
Yeah.
thoughts you have for us in this topic before we uh, send our folks off with a word of encouragement?
Well, the psalmist says, I trust in you, Lord. You are my God. My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies and from those who pursue me. We should continue to trust in the name of the Lord. Those who trust your name have never been forsaken. Psalm 9, uh, verse 10. Those who trust in your name, Lord, have never been forsaken. For those who seek you, find you.
Awesome. Trust in the Lord and take action. That's what I'm hearing you say here today. Well, this is the To Be Encouraged podcast, and this is Bishop Julius C. Trimble's podcast. And I hear a man who is dealing with a reality, but is ready to keep going and keep after it. And I love to hear that, and I love to hear your words of encouragement that are given to our To Be Encouraged listeners, as we all are in this together to offer an encouraging word to an often discouraging world. Thank you, Bishop, for your words here today.
Thank you.